We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and 7 minutes ago, the palace ended weeks of guarded silence with a declaration no one inside the royal household could dismiss. Princess Anne has officially replaced Queen Camilla as the monarchy's principal female representative at major state events. It was not described as a temporary substitution, a scheduling adjustment, or a private family arrangement. It was presented as a settled royal decision, and the emotional consequences began before the announcement had even left the palace walls. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move. When the final notice reached her private sitting room, she read the paragraph twice, lowered the page, and asked the aide whether Charles had approved every word. The aide said nothing. That silence landed harder than any reply because Buckingham Palace, the monarch's central working headquarters, had not announced a minor diary change. It had confirmed that Anne would now stand in Camilla's place at diplomatic receptions, ceremonial banquets, remembrance services, and selected overseas engagements. Anne received the decision in a separate briefing and showed no sign of victory. She closed the official folder, pressed both hands against the table, and said she would perform the duty, but would not humiliate anyone while doing it. The Princess Royal understood why the change mattered. State events are formal occasions where the crown represents Britain before foreign leaders, senior officials, military figures, and the public. The person chosen to lead them is not merely filling a chair. That person is being trusted with rank, access, authority, and the confidence of the monarchy. Charles knew the wording would wound his wife. The announcement mentioned no illness, retirement, or temporary absence, leaving no gentle explanation behind which she could hide. It made the truth unmistakable. This was about confidence, not convenience. Worse still, the revised state event schedule had been completed before Camilla received her personal notification. Names had been changed. Duties had been reassigned. Invitations were already moving through palace offices. Reversing the decision would now require a public retreat and expose the division the household was desperate to contain. Camilla folded the notice and placed it beside her without looking up. Across the palace network, Anne remained quiet, aware that acceptance could make her appear ambitious, even if refusal might weaken the crown. Meanwhile, the king prepared to face the woman beside him, carrying a decision that bore his authority, but perhaps not his design. The announcement exposed the change, but the deeper wound could only be understood by looking at the three people now trapped inside it. Anne, Camilla, and the king, forced to stand between them. Behind the formal language were three people carrying three entirely different versions of the same betrayal. Anne saw duty arriving without invitation. Camilla saw her public identity being dismantled line by line. Charles saw a decision meant to protect the monarchy threatening to fracture the closest relationships around him. No crown, title, or official statement could soften what each of them understood. One woman was being elevated because another was no longer trusted to stand where she once stood. Anne had spent decades becoming the monarchy's most dependable working royal. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had built her reputation through relentless service, difficult schedules, and a belief that duty mattered more than applause. She had never needed ceremony to prove her value. Camilla's journey had been different. State appearances had become evidence that she had survived rejection, scandal, and years of public hostility to earn a recognized place beside Charles. Losing those events did not feel like losing work. It felt like losing the final proof that she had truly been accepted. Camilla sat with Charles after the announcement, but she did not shout. She did not accuse him of cruelty. Instead, she asked whether the palace now believed Anne looked more dependable beside him. The king opened his mouth, then hesitated. That pause told her everything. He tried to explain that the decision concerned stability, not affection, but she heard only the truth beneath the careful words. When the institution had been forced to choose, it had chosen his sister. Anne carried her own unease home to Timothy Lawrence. Her husband listened as she admitted that replacing Camilla felt less like a promotion and more like entering a room where every chair had already been overturned. Timothy reminded her that she had not created the crisis. Yet Anne knew acceptance would still make her part of it. She could complete every duty perfectly and still be blamed for another woman's humiliation. William's role made the wound deeper. The prince had supported a review of state representation, a formal examination of who should carry the crown's most important public duties, because he believed private entitlement could never outweigh public trust. The future king argued that credibility depended on reliability. Charles had not begun that review, but he had allowed it to continue. His consent meant he was no helpless observer. He had opened the door through which Camilla was now being removed. Anne felt the weight of that truth. Camilla felt the sting of it. Charles could no longer hide from it. Yet their pain was only the surface of an older rupture, one born during a ceremonial event where a single refusal changed how the palace viewed them all. To understand why Charles allowed the unthinkable, the story must return to the precise moment Camilla made a choice that Anne and the palace could no longer overlook. The decision did not begin with a memo, a rivalry, or a whispered argument behind palace doors. It began during the Commonwealth Unity reception at St. James's Palace, when a foreign delegation arrived, expecting reassurance after a diplomatic dispute. Camilla was scheduled to lead the royal welcome. Anne was there only in support. Yet minutes before the doors opened, Camilla refused to proceed under the agreed arrangements, and what happened next became the incident everyone would later identify as the point of no return. Camilla had been chosen to deliver the opening address because the reception mattered far beyond ceremony. The Commonwealth Unity reception was a formal gathering designed to calm tensions between visiting representatives after a disagreement over diplomatic protocol, meaning the rules that control official greetings, rank, timing, and conduct. Every minute mattered. Every gesture carried meaning. Anne had been assigned a later role, greeting military and charitable delegates once the main welcome was complete. Camilla's expression changed when she read the final receiving order. Anne's position had been moved ahead of one of her closest household guests, and she immediately saw the alteration as a public insult. She told the organizers she would not enter until the original order was restored. The queen consort insisted that she would not be treated as decorative inside an event she had been asked to lead. As the delegation waited, she remained firm, believing that surrendering in that moment would weaken her standing forever. Anne entered the side room without photographers or aides following her. She listened as Camilla accused palace staff of quietly reducing her authority, then answered with the bluntness that had defined her entire life. Hundreds of guests, she said, should not be left waiting, while two royal women argued over who crossed a doorway first. Camilla stiffened. She told the Princess Royal that duty was easy to preach when no one was trying to erase her place. Charles received the warning only after the delay had already become dangerous. Before the king could intervene, Anne stepped into the reception, delivered the welcome without prepared notes, and restored order. She addressed the diplomatic dispute directly, praised cooperation, and guided the program forward with such control that most guests never realized. A crisis had occurred. The danger survived on paper. A confidential post-event assessment, a private report examining what went wrong and how future risks should be handled, praised Anne's composure, but warned that Camilla's refusal had created a serious diplomatic vulnerability. William later placed that document inside a wider review of state event responsibilities, making the incident impossible to dismiss as a single emotional mistake. Camilla eventually discovered that Anne's unscripted intervention had become the strongest evidence used against her. She did not blame a committee. She blamed the woman who had walked through the door she refused to cross. The reception may have ended without public embarrassment, but its private consequences were waiting behind a closed door, where Anne and Camilla would finally confront each other without ceremony to protect them. There were no aides, cameras, or carefully prepared statements when Camilla asked Anne to meet her. Only 2 chairs, a sealed copy of the palace announcement, and years of restrained resentment crowded into the room with them. Camilla did not accuse Anne of ambition. Her charge was more painful. She accused the Princess Royal of allowing duty to become a weapon. Anne listened without interruption until Camilla spoke Charles's name and suggested he had been manipulated by his own sister. Camilla had chosen a private room at Clarence House because she refused to let their relationship be reduced to official correspondence and second-hand explanations. Clarence House was the London residence used by the King and Queen Consort, but in that moment it felt less like a royal home and more like a place where rank had finally lost its protection. Anne arrived shortly before her first scheduled appearance under the revised arrangement and found the announcement already waiting between them. Camilla pushed the document across the table and asked whether Anne had known she was being considered as a permanent replacement. The Queen Consort kept her voice low, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. Anne answered that she had known a review existed, yet she had not seen its final recommendation until Charles approved it. Camilla watched her closely, then asked whether that was supposed to make the betrayal smaller. Anne stayed still as the accusation sharpened. Camilla said the Princess Royal had always been allowed to stand above palace politics while others suffered beneath them. She accused her of stepping into every crisis, appearing disciplined, and leaving everyone else to carry the shame. Anne finally answered, "Completing abandoned duties," she said, "was not the same as creating the abandonment." The words landed with brutal force. Camilla rose from her chair. She said Anne had turned one failed reception into proof that she could no longer be trusted. Anne replied that 2 future diplomatic events were already at risk of cancellation because no senior royal had accepted clear responsibility. She then revealed that she had initially refused the expanded role and had only agreed after officials warned that the crown could face another public failure. Camilla's anger changed into something colder. If Anne had refused once, then Charles must have approached her before the formal decision. The truth became unavoidable. Husband and sister had discussed Camilla's future while she still believed her position was secure. Anne did not deny it. She only said the decision had never begun with her. Anne left without another word. Camilla watched the door close and understood that the real power was not sitting in that room. It was inside the papers Charles had allowed William to assemble. Their confrontation released years of resentment, but it also exposed the person whose judgment had quietly turned frustration into policy, and policy into an irreversible royal command. Royal power rarely announces itself with shouting. Sometimes it appears as a single signature beneath language drafted to sound calm. Charles sat alone with the final recommendation before him, knowing that approval would diminish his wife and strengthen his sister. William's review was direct. The advisor's warnings were unmistakable, yet the pen remained untouched for several minutes, because the king understood that once his name entered the page, the decision would no longer belong to committees, quarters, or circumstance. It would belong to him. Charles had authorized William to oversee a formal operational review after repeated concerns about preparation, attendance, and the monarchy's ability to guarantee senior representation at major engagements. An operational review was a structured examination of how royal duties were assigned and whether those arrangements were still working. The prince could recommend change, but he could not impose it. Only the monarch held the authority to redistribute state event responsibilities, and that meant every consequence now rested with one man. Charles reread the paragraph, removing Camilla from automatic priority at designated occasions. He took off his glasses, pressed his fingers against his eyes, and asked his private secretary whether gentler wording would alter the practical result. The answer was no. Camilla would still lose first claim to the ceremonies that had once confirmed her position beside him. Softer language might reduce the shock, but it could not hide the truth. William entered soon afterward and chose his words carefully. The future king argued that protecting Camilla from embarrassment could not come before protecting the crown from another failed engagement. Charles heard the logic, but he also heard judgment beneath it. His son was not merely discussing schedules. He was saying that affection had already been allowed to interfere with duty for too long. The king reminded him that institutions did not suffer humiliation in private. People did. William did not retreat. He pointed to the decisive clause granting Anne standing authority rather than temporary substitution. Standing authority meant she would hold continuing responsibility and could not be quietly removed whenever tensions eased. That clause made the change stable, clear, and almost impossible to reverse without exposing palace weakness. Charles lifted the pen but paused again. Then he added one handwritten condition. Camilla would retain selected charitable appearances and private ceremonial patronages. The personal causes and honorary roles she could continue without leading central state occasions. It was not restoration. It was the smallest protection he could still offer her dignity. The signature finally touched the page. William watched his father complete it, and Charles knew the argument was over on paper. But paper could not control grief. Camilla would now have to watch the revised order become real at the first state event held without her. The king's pen ended the argument inside the palace. Yet, the first public implementation would reveal whether Camilla could endure seeing Anne occupy the place that had once confirmed her own survival. The new reality arrived not with another statement, but with an empty chair. At the first diplomatic banquet under the revised order, Anne's name appeared beside the king's on the final seating plan. Camilla's had been removed. She was still inside Clarence's house when the program began, fully dressed for an evening she would no longer attend. Across London, Anne prepared to enter the ballroom, knowing that every step forward would be interpreted as a step taken from someone else. Camilla had selected the gown weeks earlier before the palace confirmed her removal. The Northern Alliance state banquet was a formal dinner held to honor visiting leaders and strengthen diplomatic ties, making it the first major public test of Anne's expanded authority. The seating plan placed the Princess Royal near Charles during the reception and assigned her the conversations Camilla had once managed. Those details mattered because proximity to the monarch signaled trust, influence, and rank before every guest in the room. Camilla stood before the mirror when final confirmation arrived that no last-minute invitation would come. She removed one bracelet, placed it beside the printed program, and told her dresser to put everything away. The queen consort kept her voice steady, but the order carried the weight of a farewell. She had spent years earning a place beside Charles. Now the palace was proving that it could remove that place without removing her title. Anne paused before entering the banquet and quietly told Timothy Lawrence that she felt no triumph. Her husband reminded her that refusing now would turn duty into spectacle and deepen Camilla's humiliation. The Princess Royal understood. She could not protect one woman by embarrassing the crown before foreign leaders. Yet, every successful moment would make the judgment against Camilla feel harsher. Charles greeted the guests with practiced calm, but his attention briefly moved toward the place his wife would once have occupied. Anne noticed the hesitation. She lowered her voice, redirected the conversation, and drew a visiting minister into discussion before anyone could sense the king's distress. He recovered, but the moment exposed how deeply the new order had entered their private lives. The evening proceeded without delay, confusion, or visible tension. Anne handled every exchange with control. Charles completed the program without interruption. That success became the cruelest verdict of all, because it proved the palace could function, and perhaps function more smoothly, without Camilla at the center of the ceremony. Charles did not return immediately to Clarence's house. Instead, the king asked his sister to remain after the final guest departed. Anne recognized the seriousness in his voice and stayed. The banquet proved the new structure could work, but only after the doors closed did Charles finally tell Anne what he had been unable to admit to Camilla, or even to himself. When the final guest departed, Charles asked everyone else to leave. No secretaries remained. No advisors waited beside the door, and no official record would preserve what followed. The king and his sister stood alone after an evening that had confirmed Anne's authority and Camilla's absence. Charles thanked her for saving the event. Anne did not accept the praise. Instead, she asked the question no one else dared place before him, whether he had made the decision as monarch or surrendered to it as a frightened husband. Charles looked away before answering. This was the first time they had spoken about the emotional cost rather than the practical logic of the replacement. Their history made the silence heavier. Anne had protected him for years through action, not comfort, stepping forward whenever pressure threatened to overwhelm him. The Princess Royal rarely asked for recognition, but the king had often relied on her steadiness without admitting what that burden demanded. Charles finally confessed that he had delayed the decision because he knew Camilla would experience it as rejection by the family she had spent years trying to enter. The queen consort had survived public hostility, private suspicion, and constant comparison, and he feared that removing her from state events would confirm every insecurity she had tried to bury. He told Anne that he had wanted more time, believing delay might create a kinder answer. Anne did not soften the truth. She said postponing a necessary decision had not protected Camilla. It had allowed her to believe in a security that no longer existed. Charles absorbed the rebuke without defending himself. He knew his sister was right. By avoiding pain, he had made the eventual wound deeper. Charles then admitted something even more dangerous. In their private conversation, he revealed that he had considered withdrawing his approval after signing the final order. The king had nearly reversed everything, but the flawless banquet stopped him. Watching Anne manage the evening convinced him that retreat would place personal guilt above institutional responsibility. The monarchy had functioned. That fact could not be ignored. Anne agreed to remain in the role, but only on one condition. Charles had to tell Camilla personally that his sister had not campaigned for the position, influenced the review, or sought her removal. The Princess Royal refused to let silence turn her into the villain of a decision he had made. If the truth caused more pain, then he would have to carry it himself. Charles left before midnight and returned to Clarence's house with no prepared speech. Camilla was waiting. She did not ask whether the decision would be reversed. She asked what remained of her life inside the monarchy now that its grandest stages no longer belonged to her. Anne's condition forced Charles to abandon protective half-truths, and the honesty that followed prepared the palace for a public reaction more intense than anyone expected. By sunrise, the palace decision no longer belonged only to the royal family. It belonged to broadcasters, newspaper editors, crowds, critics, and millions of people deciding what Anne's elevation represented. Some saw discipline replacing privilege. Others saw a wife being publicly abandoned by the husband who once defied the world for her. Yet one image overwhelmed every argument, and stepping from the state car alone, composed and unsmiling, while the space traditionally associated with Camilla remained unmistakably empty. Britain woke to a story that had escaped palace control. National broadcasters interrupted regular programming while newspapers rushed out special editions, questioning whether the change marked stability or punishment. Palace communications insisted the new arrangement would protect continuity, meaning the crown could guarantee that a trusted senior royal would always attend its most important public duties. But formal language could not contain the deeper argument. The decision had become a judgment on reliability, marriage, loyalty, and whether years of personal sacrifice could survive one loss of institutional confidence. Camilla watched the morning coverage with Charles beside her. The presenter described Anne as the monarchy's safest pair of hands, and the words struck with quiet cruelty. The queen consort switched off the television and said that safety was apparently what the palace believed she could never provide. Charles tried to explain that public praise for his sister did not erase Camilla's service, but she answered that comparison had already done exactly that. Anne saw the same broadcast from her office, and reacted with anger rather than pride. The Princess Royal ordered her staff not to circulate flattering headlines, celebrate opinion polls, or answer attacks against Camilla. She understood that every headline calling her victorious made another woman's loss feel like entertainment. Duty had brought her authority, but public approval threatened to turn that duty into humiliation. One newspaper captured the national divide with brutal simplicity. Its front page carried the headline, "The Crown Turns to Anne," showing her entering the banquet, while a smaller image displayed Camilla leaving a church service days earlier. Outside Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main official residence and administrative center, a crowd gathered near the gates. One woman held a handwritten sign reading, "Duty has a name," and nearby, another placed flowers beneath a note expressing sympathy for Camilla. Charles saw admiration hardening into judgment. Anne saw support becoming triumphalism. Camilla saw strangers debating whether her pain was deserved. The reaction proved the Princess Royal had public confidence, but it did not settle what the change would mean for the woman displaced by it. With the country already delivering its judgment, Camilla must make the only decision still under her control: whether to resist her diminished role or give it a meaning the palace never expected. The final outcome was not reconciliation in the easy sense, nor was it victory for one woman over another. Anne remained the crown's principal female representative at state events. Camilla did not regain the place removed from her. Charles did not reverse his signature, yet inside that painful certainty, each of them made a final choice. Anne chose service without celebration. Charles chose responsibility without pretending it carried no cost, and Camilla chose to leave the struggle for ceremonial power behind. Anne retained standing responsibility for the designated state program, meaning she now held continuing authority over the major diplomatic and ceremonial duties assigned to her. Camilla continued selected charitable, community, and personally important engagements away from the central diplomatic schedule. The monarchy had settled into a divided model. The Princess Royal represented discipline and institutional continuity at major occasions, while the Queen Consort focused on causes where her contribution did not depend on ceremonial precedents. Charles finally told Camilla the whole truth during a private conversation at Clarence House. Anne had not demanded the position; she had initially refused it. The king explained that his sister accepted only after the palace warned that future engagements could fail, without clear leadership. Camilla listened without interruption, then admitted that the truth did not remove the pain. It did, however, stop her from carrying hatred toward the wrong person. Camilla requested one final private meeting with Anne. She confessed that watching her take the place beside Charles had felt like watching the palace erase years of sacrifice in a single decision. Anne did not dismiss that wound. The Princess Royal told her that no seating plan could erase survival, but no past sacrifice could guarantee a future position. Camilla understood the difference. Acceptance did not mean pretending the loss had been fair. It meant refusing to let the loss control everything that followed. Camilla removed the official state event calendar from her desk and replaced it with plans for literacy work and domestic abuse initiatives. Those initiatives were organized efforts supporting reading and people affected by violence at home. The gesture marked acceptance, not surrender. She was choosing purpose over status. Anne attended the next state reception without triumph, while Charles publicly thanked both women for serving the crown in different ways. The acknowledgement restored nothing, but it recognized the human cost. The final verdict was clear. The modern monarchy had chosen reliability above sentiment. Anne became its unwavering center of duty. Camilla preserved her dignity after authority slipped away. Charles protected the crown but could not protect everyone he loved from the consequences. The hierarchy was settled, the wound was understood, and the monarchy emerged steadier, sadder, and permanently changed. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next.